Good morning. Viewer, good morning. Welcome to youtube.com. More specifically, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Austin Paul. And if you're watching this video, happy Halloween. Yes, after 1 year, we are finally back to finish once and for all my video series entitled Music as Horror 15 Haunting Albums. Now, you may be watching this and thinking to yourself, Austin, it has been since November of 2023 since you last uploaded a video in this series. What has taken you so long? Listen, life happens, baby, okay? I'm in a new place now. I'm freaking married now. A lot's changed. And quite frankly, can I be frank with you? I needed a break after part 2 of the video series because I was doing nothing but listening to horrible music nonstop, and it started to take a toll on my mental health. And I just needed some time apart from it. And in that time, months flew by, and I kind of just put this whole thing on the back burner. But it has always been in the back of my mind, itching to get back to it and finish it. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for waiting. We are finally back. And I'm very excited for today's video because it's something that I've worked really hard on and I think is going to be really interesting. Today we are diving into our final tier, tier 3 of Music as Horror. But before we do that, I want to lay some quick groundwork first. Very obviously, we all know that the nature of tier lists and iceberg videos and stuff like that is that it works and exists on a gradient, on a spectrum. Similar to that, there is also a spectrum to things like human emotion, right? You have minor and major feelings in the spectrum of human emotion. It's why we have words like content and euphoria. They convey different levels of the same emotion. So likewise, there are also minor fears and major fears. Part 1 of this series was entitled Something's Watching You, and I wanted to explore how music can instill a creeping fear into the listener. It's a very mild form of horror, or the subtle beginning of how fear naturally builds inside of our minds. The second video in the series was entitled The Horror of Humanity, which took on a more existential and physical shade of horror. Less of an idea, more of a depiction, showing us the real-world horrors and atrocities that affect us in our day-to-day lives, more in-your-face and confrontational. And as I've ventured further into Tier 3, diving further into the putrid depths of what the music world has the potential to be, it became increasingly evident that I was not going to be coming out of it unscathed. I had a really bad time listening to these albums. I mean, it's part of the reason why it's taken me a year to put out this final video. It started feeling less like listening to music and more like torture. And so, as I began to listen to and collect and arrange these albums, it became clear what this final tier would be called. And that is torture music. This is torture music. So, I hope you're ready, because at long last, we are finally ready to dive into our first album of Tier 3 torture music. Usual content warnings. Basically everything, okay? So, without further ado, let's dive in. Our first album of Tier 3 is entitled Burned Mind by a band called Wolf Eyes. Wolf Eyes was formed in 1996 by a man named Nate Young, no relation to Neil, and they are formed in the state of Michigan. Wolf Eyes are still around. They are currently touring as a two-piece featuring Nate Young and John Olson. Wolf Eyes has been a prominent name in the noise rock world, and Burned Mind came to us way back in 2004. So happy 20-year anniversary to Burned Mind. And I have a fun little anecdote about this album. Last year, when I was beginning my research for this video series, I went to one of my friends, one of my coworkers, and I was telling him about this project that I was working on, and he was like, "Oh, dude, you should listen to Wolf Eyes." And I was like, "Okay, never heard of him. I'll give him a shot." And he was like, "Yeah, me and my friends used to do mushrooms, and we would put on this album, and we would turn all the lights off, and we would watch the movie The Predator on mute with this album playing on full blast. We would just get high and do that." And I don't think I can imagine a worse evening than that. So Burned Mind was actually one of the very first albums that I listened to while I started researching music for this project. And when I tell you that I had not had much experience in disturbing music before this, I basically had none. And I felt like a baby deer in the headlights when I was listening to this album for the first time. It literally physically made my chest tight. Like, it made me so strung up and on edge. So the opening track, Dead in a Boat, starts out very unassuming. It's basically just like gently creaking wood and some distant tapping sounds. But then all of a sudden, the song erupts into chaos, starting with this ultra high pitch frequency coming in suddenly, shattering your eardrums, and then we just get a wall of static sound. Everything is distorted here. There is basically nothing intelligible. And yeah, it's just so abrupt and out of nowhere. I highly recommend, if you're going to listen to this album, the first few seconds of the song are so quiet that you may be encouraged to like turn it up. But seriously, have your headphones on like medium or like, somewhere in the middle volume wise, so you don't actually rupture your eardrums when this first song starts up. The next song is entitled Stabbed in the Face. This song brings a lot of the same sounds that we heard in the first track, but it adds more rhythm to it. So you have that steady thumping low bass, and you also have these modular synthesizers, which are like pumping in these low frequencies alongside it, and a lot more of those same high squealing frequencies as well, like boo, 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 and then just like wee, wee, and it's all fuzzed and glitched and staticked out. And we have lyrics. I think they're classified as lyrics. We have Nate, yelling essentially. And I can't understand a word this guy says throughout this entire album. Couldn't tell you word one. No clue. It's just distorted, malicious yelling in rhythm to the thumping bass. And it sounds just so enraged and aggressive. I went online trying to figure out like lyrics, trying to see if I could figure out what this guy was saying. But the internet was also no help. I couldn't find any lyrics for this album at all. However, with song titles like Stabbed in the Face, Urine Burn, and Black Vomit, I think I'm good. We have very few tracks on this album that give you time to breathe. In fact, I would say we have 0 tracks on this album that give you time to breathe. After these first 2 songs, we have 4 songs in a row that all flow together continuously. There's not really a discernible place where one ends and where one begins. Reaper's Gong is probably one of the easier songs to listen to because it is mostly more contained and sounds more like dark ambient music more than anything. Village Oblivia comes in hard and strong, however, giving us more of the same sonic structure that we heard in those first 2 tracks. The vocals could be interpreted as yelling or dry heaving. I think it's up to your interpretation. And then Urine Burn comes, and this one is interesting because it is essentially digital popping sounds. Like if you've ever experienced audio clipping in an audio recording, it's like that. It's like digital popping, and there's one in the left ear and one in the right ear, and they're playing kind of sporadically. It's kind of like ASMR. It's interesting. It's really kind of like a curveball. The song Rattlesnake Shake has some cool rattling sounds, you could call them. And, while listening to this album more recently, I can kind of see how listening to this album while watching a movie like The Predator would fit. When I listen to this song, I can absolutely see soldiers stalking through a dense, thick, humid jungle. Yeah, the tripping part, though, I think is absolutely insane. Our title track follows Rattlesnake Shake, and it is quite the endurance test, being like 4 minutes of just ultra high frequencies. In fact, the last 40 seconds or so of this song is like nothing but just super high ear piercing frequencies, as well as like super distorted guitar feedback, like from an amp. So, super nice. Noise rock is basically just how unpleasant can you make these instruments sound, and they're nailing it. The song Ancient Delay makes use of some really cool modular synth sounds in the intro. It just features like a repetitious wave of the same booming sound, like coming in and out. It almost sounds like a distant alarm going off, like kind of similar. Like I imagine being in a jungle and like miles off in the hills, you just hear like this alarm echoing kind of distantly. And then on top of this, Wolf Eyes adds more instrumentation and layers to create quite a cool atmosphere. And then we have the 8-minute long track called Black Vomit. This song begins as kind of like a dirge, and there's this slow and steady thumping of what sounds like a war drum with layers of like screeching and buzzing sounds and like raw electricity being layered in on top of it. This increases and builds until we are again hit with like a sledgehammer of pounding noise, like we heard in the second track. More distorted vocals, intense, sinister, really off-putting. They're joining into the mix, and this booming war drum starts to become less rhythmic and more sporadic. And I don't know if I'm doing the feeling of this album much justice, but when I tell you that this song ends, and it ends just as abruptly as the album began, I felt so drained. Like sitting through 8 minutes for the final song of this album. When it was finally over, I was just like, oh my God, finally. But I've listened to this album quite a few times since then, and it actually has grown on me quite a bit. Yes, there are very grating, ear-piercing sounds that are meant to be uncomfortable, but it is palatable. And I think that Wolf Eyes has created a really effective soundscape here with their instruments and with their composition. I think it's very effective. As someone who hasn't really listened to too much noise rock, I think it's really unique sounding. I really like the use of modular synths and electronic instrumentation alongside of the distorted guitars. And like I said before, using the guitars as a way to create like this destructive wall of sound, I think is a really cool concept. And I think that they were really successful in what they were trying to do with this album. It's not for the faint of heart or for the faint of eardrum, but if that interests you at all, I suggest you give it a shot. It's on all the streaming platforms. Take a listen to it if you're interested, but make sure your headphones are turned down low. And it's only our introduction into Tier 3. So without further ado, let's move on to our second album. Our second album in Tier 3 is entitled Making Orange Things, and it was a collaborative effort by Venetian Snares and Speed Ranch. We begin our exploration of this album by traveling to Canada, home of Aaron Funk, who has been making music under the moniker Venetian Snares for as long as I've been alive. 1992. This man's music is famous for being off the walls and unhinged, and Making Orange Things is no different. This is by far the most unhinged album I've listened to while researching music for this video series. Venetian Snares partnered with UK-based noise artist Speed Ranch, and they would send tracks back and forth to complete the album, making edits and making changes along the way. It is a collaborative thing. Yes, Aaron and Speed Ranch are popular for their music being off the walls, and this album asks, what if you never saw another wall in your fucking life? Our first track, called Fire Beats, opens up with a demon-possessed version of the THX sounds. If you're familiar with that, you're familiar with that. It feels like you're in the cockpit of a spaceship, but instead of being launched up into space, you're being slammed down into hell. This song This song introduces us to concepts of glitchcore and harsh noise, all while maintaining a very aggressive and hard-hitting beat. The message is clear from the beginning of this album, and that message is fuck you. This opening track, and the entire album really, I feel like it should come with the audio equivalency of an epilepsy warning. The BPMs on these tracks are unlike anything I've ever heard before. And every sound that accompanies these ultra fast beats only glitches in and out for like half of a second. I'm so serious. Like it is glitched out to the max. Venetian Snares and Speed Ranch utilize human screaming in these first couple tracks, and they distort them to kind of make it sound like static and just like another noise that's being layered into the mix of these songs. Speaking of the second song, it's called We Hate Russell, and it makes very good use of this concept. The phrase, I will kill you, is repeated a lot, and it is so distorted and staticky, and it's every word of the phrase is hit on the beat. So it's like, I will kill you. And on the you, the bass, like the kick drum, if you could call it that, is going like boo 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 boo, and the word you is being like repeated over and over again. So it's like yeah. It's just absolutely insane. It's like probably like 200 beats per minute. Yeah, it is a full frontal assault on your senses. It is completely overwhelming. What's crazy about this album, though, is even though everything you're hearing is overwhelming and insane sounding, it's actually mixed really well. Everything that comes through here sits down really nice in its place in the mix. And while, yes, there are some super grating high frequencies that are going to hurt your ears no matter what volume they're listened to, they're at least placed in a space in the mix that is appropriate for what the artists are trying to do here. The third track is much more spacious, spacious, but spacious does not mean like calm or nice. It just means that there's no drums on it, basically. There is human screams, very grating, high frequency pitches, alongside static and harsh feedback. People yelling and shouting phrases that I can't understand. It kind of sounds like you're listening to a radio broadcast from hell. The fourth track is more glitchy speedcore, not doing anything really new at this point on the album, just ultra fast drum beats with super glitchy static noises being sprinkled in and out. The fifth track, entitled Unborn Baby, is more of the same, but it also introduces us to something that these two artists are going to do multiple times over the course of this album, and it is one of the most unhinged and hilarious choices artistically that I've heard in quite a long time. Basically, this album in parts turns into a covers album using just straight up snippets of songs being thrown in. 1 minute into the song, we get a complete change up, and the song turns into the most fucked up cover of Michael Jackson's Beat It you've ever heard. It's an ultra slow sample of the instrumental. So you're hearing that, and then Venetian Snares, like blown out bass drum is playing alongside it, and it's like blow, 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 blow. And it creates a lovely spin on a widely loved song. It really caught me off guard the first time that I heard it. The next song, Meta Abuse, is as aggressively chaotic and as violent as this album has ever been. And then we get another delightful injection of pop music. About a minute 30 into this song, it completely stops. And then we just get the introduction to Bon Jovi's You Give Love a Bad Name injected into the song. Like, it's literally just the song. Like, there's nothing done to it. It's just like, shot through the heart. And, yeah, it's something. It's really great. And then on the phrase, you give love a bad name, like right on name, it just goes right back into bad name. And it's just, God, it's so crazy. It's so unhinged, and I absolutely love it. I actually, like, it was a laugh out loud moment for me while listening to this album. I have a note here that says, you know that scene in Jackass where they stand in front of a riot grenade that shoots rubber projectiles at them with a massive explosion? That's what listening to this album feels like. And it's around this point in the album where I just feel like I'm ready to turn it off. But, you know, we're in tier 3 now. You don't get to turn it off. This is torture music. It's torture for a reason. You have to sit with it, and you have to listen to the whole thing from front to back. You don't have to do that. I have to do that. So it really starts to set in that tone of, like, it is just so overwhelming and is such a, like I said, full frontal assault on your senses. Like, it is just overwhelming, but you just have to sit and take it, you know, like, just let it wash over you and completely control you. But for your sake, I'll kind of just do a brief overview of the last few songs here, because there's not a whole lot new happening. Molly's Reach Around is the closest thing on this album that you could call a song, but it's still barely. I wouldn't call it that. The next song is called Russell Hates This Track, and I don't know what these two guys have against my boy Russell, but I agree with him. This song fucking sucks. Following that, we get the song Viva Las Vegas, which, you guessed it, incorporates the song Viva Las Vegas. The song Tushy Love incorporates audio from actual pornography alongside of these horrible soundscapes, so that's super fun. And the final track, Halfway Up the Staircase of Mucus, is, you guessed it, another cover song. This time, Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, only it's not so much using a sample of the song as it's just recreating that famous guitar melody, but it's using extremely grating, ultra high frequency sounds to do it. And it's just so bad to listen to, and it's so long, and it's just headache inducing. And that's the end. I hated my time with this album, and I'm pretty sure 99.99999% of you will also hate this album. For previous albums and previous tiers, I've said that if this album interests you, you should give it a listen. But I'm not going to say that for this one, just because I want to respect you and respect your time. It's fucking horrible. So just don't even bother with it, okay? You're welcome. And without further ado, let's move on to our third album of Tier 3. Over the course of this video series so far, we've listened to all sorts of different genres of music, exploring how their unique sound conveys horror. The final 3 albums of this tier list will all fall under the same genre of music, and to me, it is the pinnacle of horror music. Together, you and I will be exploring a genre called power electronics. This is the most extreme music I've ever heard in my life. The concepts alone of certain albums in this genre of music have turned me away from even wanting to listen to them because they are so repulsive. Having said that, I wanted to do a little overview before we dive into these final 3 albums of this genre of music, because there's a lot of bullshit in the world of power electronics, and I want to make sure that it is identified and called out before we spend any time on it, because I think that's important. You may hear me say the phrase, "This is the most extreme music I've ever heard in my life," and you may think it's something new on the scene, a creation and a result of the ever souring world that we live in today, but you'd be wrong. Power electronics started in the 1980s. And since then, it has been responsible for some of the rawest, most unbridled, transgressive expressions of human emotion and thought ever captured in audio form. What we're going to be discussing together exists only to offend, only to repulse. So, what is it and why does it exist? Well, let's look into the history of this music and get a better understanding of how it came to be. The band White House was formed in the year 1980, and for the majority of the band's lifetime, about 30 or so years, the band was a 3-piece ensemble comprised of William Bennett, Philip Best, and Peter Sotos. William Bennett stated before the creation of White House, quote, "I often fantasized about creating a sound that could bludgeon an audience into submission," end quote. And I believe what they accomplished, or I believe what they created accomplished just that. The sound of power electronics, of course, varies, depending on who's making it. But for the most part, it is categorized as throbbing, distorted bass tones, screeching feedback, and ear-piercingly high frequencies, usually accompanied by an angry man yelling at you. Albums in this genre explore the lowest forms of human existence, and they are absolutely relentless in their depictions of it. But when you bring an idea out into the world, there's no way to control how it gets perpetuated, especially in the day and age that we live in, the age of the internet. You never know who is going to take hold of an idea and run with it and use it to propagate their own agendas and ideals. And with that in mind, there are a lot of dickheads in this music space creating shitty, exploitative, racist, harmful, fascist, shitty, fucking stupid ass music in this corner of the music world. I've done everything in my power to make sure that I'm avoiding those assholes, so that we're not giving them the time of day. But that being said, I feel like by definition of exploring this music, we're kind of operating in a very gray area here. So I want to start this off by saying that I think that all of this music is inherently gross, harmful, and destructive by its very nature. And I think that the people who make it would agree with me. The only difference is I think that they think that's great. So before we dive into our final 3 albums, I just want to, again, give another generalized content warning, trigger warning, everything. If it makes you feel bad, it's here. If it repulses you, it's here, and it's probably celebrated. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, our 3rd album in Tier 3 is entitled True Crime by the band Bloody Minded. Bloody Minded was founded in New York in 1995 by Mark Solotroff and Megan Amish, with Mark Solotroff being the sole constant member of the band, being supported throughout the years by various different musicians and artists. The group was formed in New York City, but they moved to Chicago shortly after releasing their first album, with True Crime being their highly anticipated follow-up. But it took them 7 years to finally release it because of moving and life getting in the way and stuff like that. So with their album being so anticipated, I actually read an interview with Mark Solotroff that occurred between the release of the first album and the second album. And he actually seemed like a really down-to-earth guy. He just enjoys confrontational subject matter. And so with this interview about true crime, we're going to be hearing about true crime. Mark wanted this album to be the final word when it comes to the musical exploration of concepts and topics of murder, true crime, serial killers, that whole world. And I think if someone wanted to challenge this album and come out with an even more intense exploration of these themes, I would respectfully sit that one out. This album, while very effective vocally, it does not vary much sonically. And so I won't be going as much into detail track to track on this album, but I'll instead kind of be giving an overview of what you can expect from most of these songs, if not all of them. Most songs, if not all of them, feature an undercurrent of steady thumping sub bass that perpetuates throughout the entire track. It reminds me a lot of the movie Hereditary. If you've ever seen that, if you pay attention, you'll notice that throughout many intense moments in the film, you'll hear a steady thumping sub bass that is lying really low in the mix. You're not supposed to notice it outright. It's supposed to be kind of this subconscious thing that is building tension in your mind and in your body while you're watching these events take place on screen. So there's that going on, as well as static, buzzing electronic sounds, feedback, modular synths that all come together to shape the soundscapes that are being created here. And all of that sonically plays while multiple voices are speaking over top of each other. And they're basically describing the conditions that bodies were discovered in at crime scenes. For the most part, there are 3 voices that you can hear, and they're all voiced by Mark Solotroff. You have the main voice in the center mix, and that is someone who I imagine to be like a coroner, giving a report on the condition in which the body was found at the crime scene, like I said before. This voice in the center comes across as very unemotional, very cold, very matter of fact, very blunt. Like a professional doing their job. They're just stating the facts. And then in the right ear and in the left ear, you have Mark repeating what the man in the middle is saying, only this time much more emotional, much more brash, loud, and outspoken. One voice seems to be horrified by it. One voice seems to be reveling in it, and everyone is saying the same thing, right? But they're kind of being played at different intervals. So the man in the middle will start, and then a second later, yelly guy will start, and then a half a second after that, reveille guy will start. It's very off-putting and very difficult to listen to, because it's not super easy to understand what they're saying, but when you can understand what they're saying, it is really gross and horrific. In a lot of these tracks, there will be specific phrases that are repeated throughout the entirety of the song that are almost kind of like a focal point for each different track. Phrases like leaves stuffed in her mouth, or choking on blood, there was nothing he could do to escape, open your mouth. And I think it is obviously an intentional choice. And I'm wondering if Bloody Minded, by doing this, is exploring different intentions or different aspects of murders committed. Yeah, it's interesting, the phrases that are chosen to be repeated. And there are audible rises and dips in the energy of this music as it flows through. The track Deadly Thrills, I think, does a really good job of that. As certain phrases are repeated over and over again with more intensity, the music will build and rise and then like slowly kind of come back down. And it like really is pretty like harrowing to listen to when you're listening to someone just yelling the phrase "leaves stuffed in her mouth" like over and over again, and then you just hear this wall of static and bass rumbling louder and louder. It's very effective in what it's trying to accomplish. And then the final track, St. Joseph's Children, explores the same themes, only this time we're not limited to adults. And it's this song in particular that kind of clues us in on the fact that there's basically nothing off limits here anymore for us. There's nothing too vulgar. There's nothing too taboo to be explored. Everything's on the table, and it's going to be shoved in your face whether you like it or not. So, that's True Crime by Bloody Minded. And from here on out, it's not getting any easier. So feel free to hop off whenever you want, but I'm just letting you know nothing's off the table. And we're going to be talking about it. So without further ado, let's get into album 4. Okay, our fourth album for Tier 3 is entitled Australian Units by Death Pact International. I learned about this album because it popped up on my YouTube recommended list. The album art caught my eye. Spooky, scary looking dog. And so I decided to give it a listen. And after a few songs, I was interested enough to do some research into the band. And that's when I learned that Death Pact International is in fact not a band, but instead an idea. DPI was created in 1985 by a few members who would eventually go on to form a band called the Grey Wolves. And Death Pact International was created and intended to be used by anyone, and I mean anyone. So Australian Units is an album that was made by like 9 different artists, most of them being from different areas of Australia, hence Australian Units. These are Australian artists all coming together to make an album under the name Death Pact International. This album was released in 2014, and it is comprised of 16 tracks, which all run to be around an hour and 13 minutes. So this is a long one. Right out of the gate, the watchword for this album is loud. Everything here is loud and abrasive. I've been listening to this album as a refresher for the last 2 days, and I've had a headache for the last 2 days. I'm not joking. Physically, this album gives me a headache every time I listen to it. So we're getting to a point now where the music that we're listening to is physically affecting us. But headache or not, the reason that I decided to include this album in the list is because it is by far the most interesting and attention-retaining power electronics album that I've listened to over the course of researching this video series. And the reason being is that this album actually feels like an album. True Crime by Bloody Minded was a lot of just the same thing over and over again. We weren't really experimenting a lot with sound. We weren't really challenging what we could do. But here, with Australian Units, we are. Not only does every track on this album feel like it has its own unique personality, But even the transitions between songs have a personality and are just as interesting as the music themselves. For instance, the first song on the album, appropriately titled Intro, is a meditative drone. It has tonally matched low and high frequencies slowly pulsing throughout the track consistently. And layered on top of those tones, we get what sounds like these giant cavernous crashing sounds. Like if you took a big hunk of steel and tossed it down an open elevator shaft that was like hundreds of floors deep. And you're just hearing those metallic crashing and banging sounds echoing up from the dark, deep hole. And then on top of that, you have a vocal track, which is basically repeating the same 3 phrases over and over again, but in a very subdued tone of voice, kind of like a calm tone of voice. The 3 phrases being, I've never done anything wrong. You always kept the best bits for yourself. And I've never done nothing bad. And that just repeats over and over again. Again, kind of like a meditation or a mantra. The following track, Untitled, is much more aggressive, and it comes out hard and fast. There are vocals on this track as well. They are much more aggressive. They're growly, and I can't hardly understand anything that's being said, but it doesn't really matter, because when I can understand what's being said, it's just some guy saying fuck you. So these vocals, while being spoken by an Australian person, so sometimes it's hard enough to understand the accent. Sorry, Australians. When it comes to power electronics, it's even more difficult, because the vocal track is set so low in the mix and distorted and fuzzy. It's like taking an uphill challenge and increasing the incline by like 40 degrees. And then on top of all that, there's also a delay effect added to the vocals and reverb. So it's super echoey, and it's also repeating in an off-kilter rhythm. So yeah, kind of like good luck understanding what's being said on, in fact, most of these tracks. It's really, really hard to understand what's being said. But I think what they're there to do is set a tone and set an atmosphere. It's basically just another instrument being layered on top of everything else that's happening in this music. This bog of like sandpapery static and rumbling low bass persist through this entire track, and occasionally you can hear like a slowly rising siren, and it just adds to this anxiety that you feel while listening to the second song. The following track is called Make Them Crawl, which sounds very similar to the second track, only it's basically turning the dial up on everything by like 3 notches. I described the vocals in the first track as subdued, the vocals in the second track as growled, and the vocals on the third track are just full on yelling. We're getting to the screaming portion of the program now, with the titular phrase, make them crawl, being the most prominent phrase being screamed at you, as well as a bunch of other pleasant commands. There's 2 vocals on this track. One is male, doing most of the screaming, and there's like a plate reverb effect put on the vocal track, so it sounds like you're listening to someone yelling in a like small, fully concrete empty room. That kind of fast reverb, that fast echo that almost sounds kind of like metallic. It's like, it sounds like someone in a closed confined space. And there's also a female vocal present in this song, which is much more mocking in tone. I can't really understand what she says, but she's laughing and she's speaking kind of sardonically or mockingly. And all of this is, again, just building that anxiety, that rising feeling of tension in your chest. So far, this album has been a build on itself. even though all three tracks, these first three tracks are distinct and separate, they're kind of building on an idea, it feels like. And the fourth track, called Void, is the first one that really does something different, which I found very interesting. First of all, it's the first song without vocals. And secondly, it's 6 minutes long. And it's just 6 minutes of static radio frequency cutting in and out psychotically, like for the entire time. It's just that. So, okay, imagine you have a channel open, or imagine you have a radio on, and the radio is set to a frequency that is not outputting anything, so it's just radio static. And on this radio, you have a mute button. And when you press it, the sound goes off, and when you press it back, the sound comes back on. And it's basically someone just doing this. Like sporadically and psychotically for the entire 6 minutes. Like that's all you're listening to. If you're familiar with ghost hunting videos like I am, you'll know what a spirit box is. But for those of you who don't know, a spirit box is essentially this device that ghost hunters use that flips through radio channels at a very rapid pace, like very rhythmically like that. And they believe that the spirit can use the energy being emitted from that device and communicate with the ghost hunters using like catching certain radio frequencies and using those human voices coming through the radio to communicate like one word at a time specifically. This sounds like that, only it's a demon communicating through the spirit box, and it can't speak human language. It just growls at you with digital distortion. You know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to play a little clip of it here. Okay, so you get it. That's what it's like for 6 minutes. Again, every time I listen to this album, no matter how quietly, I always get a headache. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit now for the rest of the album and just kind of talk about moments of interest that occur throughout the different tracks. The song titled Must, Don't Want To, Must, Don't Want To is comprised of solely German language vocals, which always scares me a little bit when it comes to this music, because again, we have some shitty people making shitty music. Sorry, Germans, but you know, there was a pretty shitty guy who spoke your language at one point in time. So I don't really obviously understand what they're saying, but the vocals are being delivered in a way that makes it sound like this man is desperately pleading or like begging for something. He is shouting and his voice is cracking, and it sounds like he's repeating the same sentence over and over again. Obviously a sentence I don't understand, but you can tell he's saying, you know, the same phrase over and over again. And it's very desperate sounding. It's very, he's reaching, like he's struggling to get attention paid to him or something like that. You just get that feeling as you're listening to it. But then this song throws a complete curveball at you, and like the last 20 seconds of this song, the song abruptly stops, and then all of a sudden this classical style violin track comes in for like 20 seconds. It's just like very serene, very beautiful classical violin piece, which I actually ended up Shazamming and found out that it's a song entitled Parisha for Violin, Solo No. 2 in D minor, BWV 1004 I. Allemande by Christoph Poppen. It's very pretty and very unexpected. The track that follows that is called Sins of Memory, and it opens up with who I believe is a man named Colin McLaren, who is an Australian former undercover detective, a celebrated man who has spent a large majority of his retired life investigating the JFK assassination. And so it's a audio clip of him talking about a piece of footage that was shot of the JFK assassination from an alternate angle that shows that it was not in fact Lee Harvey Oswald that shot JFK, but in fact a Secret Service member who accidentally shot him. So it was fun to like listen to that and not know what it was and kind of do some like digging. I was like, okay, Australian JFK theory or something like that, you know? I felt like a detective. But anyways, after that sample plays, oh, and the final phrase of that audio clip gets repeated like over and over again for quite a long time, and then it slowly fades out. And then what follows that is these really soft, gentle synth pads that go back and forth between two chords. And it's very serene and very somber sounding. And then because, of course, this is power electronics, you have an angry Australian man screaming at the top of his lungs over top of that. Like, this would be a very nice song if it weren't for that. And again, because it's power electronics, I can't really understand what this guy is saying. I can hear a couple of phrases here and there. Like, I heard him say the Zapruder film, which is the most famous footage of the JFK assassination. And I think he says at one point the phrase like, which never should have happened or something like that. So I don't really know exactly what he's saying, but he also sounds desperate and heartbroken and upset. So it was kind of like an interesting moment on the album for me. The song titled The Bad Father is essentially what I just imagine what it was like to listen to the radio in 1925. Here's how it sounds.
And of untold resources, all place gladly, willingly, at the feet of Mother England. Millions of acres of this country produce more food than its cancer more population can possibly consume. And so the substance of huge proportions grows in a golden life-giving tide to the people of the...
The final 30 minutes of this album is comprised of mostly just ear-piercingly high frequencies, which are designed to do nothing but hurt you, except the final track, which also has ear-piercingly loud high frequencies that are only made to hurt you. But it also features a man on the phone with some sort of like government employee. It like sounds like you're listening to a recorded phone call, and this guy is just absolutely livid and just letting this poor, like I imagine a DMV employee. He's just letting this poor dude absolutely have it. He is ripping into him. He's trying to like get a driver's test on the books or something like that. Otherwise he's going to lose his job or something like that. This dude is absolutely out of his mind, flipping out on this poor customer service worker. And it reminded me a lot of being working in customer service during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. I was just like, this poor guy. And every time the other guy talks, he's just like, yes, sir, hold on right away. I'll get working on that. And he's like, you fucking better, you fucking like, gosh. So that's Australian Units, my friends. It's on YouTube if you're interested in checking it out. Just know you're going to get a headache. Yeah, that's our 4th album, which means, by God, it's time. We are finally getting to our 5th and final album for Tier 3 and the final album of this entire video series. So, without further ado, let's get into it. I hope you've been enjoying your time, because I certainly have. Folks, we have made it to our final album of this video series, and it is a doozy. This album is entitled How Welcome is Death to I Who Have Nothing More to Do But Die, by an artist named Con Dom. This one is fucking bleak, man. Throughout all of my research, I have not listened to an album that has affected me as deeply as this one has, hence why it is our final album for this list. Con Dom, CON-DOM, Condom also stands for control domination, and it is a moniker used by UK artist Mike Dando. And there's not a whole lot that I can find out about this guy online. I do know that he has a live album that was released in 1984, so he's been making music for at least that long. And this album came to us in 2016. Yes, 2016. And it was his final album before he retired from making music professionally. And this album, while it explores many topics and themes, it revolves centrally around the passing of his mother, Nora, who you see pictured here. And yes, that is actually a picture of Mike Dando's mother, Nora. There are other photos on the physical album that show her, the deterioration of her health that are very hard to look at. None of them are graphic, but they are just sobering and just like really heart-wrenching to see. So yes, this album is about Mike Dando processing the death of his mother, and it is pure, raw emotion and frustration towards the state that his mother lived through as whatever illness she was suffering from progressed. And like I said, this is the most harrowing album that I've listened to while researching, and that is because the sentiments expressed in this album are as naked and as ugly as they come. We all have ugly thoughts, horrible thoughts, while going through times of struggle. And normally we keep those to ourselves. They're natural, but we can't keep them kind of locked away, or at the very most, we share them with a partner or maybe with a therapist. But Mike is putting them all on Front Street here. Listening to this album feels invasive, feels like I shouldn't be hearing any of this, and I really shouldn't. I have kind of struggled with whether or not I feel like this album is exploitative by nature. But that being said, it's his struggle, it's his mother, it's his life. So I've kind of come to the conclusion that I think no. I feel like I'm an intruder on this private artistic expression, even though it's not, it's public. Anyways, I'm kind of talking in circles, but that's the feeling that I get. So let's get started. Let's intrude together here. The first song is entitled Granddad, You're Lovely, which is a sample of Clive Dunn's Granddad, We Love You. And it features a chorus of children singing the phrase, Granddad, we love you. You're lovely. That's what we think of you. And it's just like this happy, upbeat children's choir singing that. And then all of a sudden we get this blaring siren that slowly rises in the mix, fades in, until it completely overwhelms and snuffs out the children's choir. It eats it whole. The children's choir is gone, and it is now power electronics time. And it is ushering us into the hell that Mike Dando has in store for us, because the very next song, Living Death, is 14 minutes long. And it consists of the same blaring feedback tone over rumbling bass and static as Mike shouts phrases over top of himself, repeating the same thing, that basically are phrases that he probably heard his mother say to him. It's Mike speaking, but it's Nora's words, if that makes sense. And she's expressing her frustration about the state of her life and the state of her physical health and what she is now having to go through because of this illness. And again, this is as naked and as ugly as it gets, but it is real. It is real human frustration. You're hearing Mike yell phrases like, I can't shit and piss by myself. The nurse is sitting there watching me, even though she doesn't want to. Like someone losing their ability to be independent. Can't even use the bathroom by themselves or even clean up themselves after using the bathroom. This is just open expression, vulgar expression about Nora's physical destitution, She's not pulling any punches. She's just saying it as plainly as possible. It's just like so raw. And then there's also passages where Nora is yelling at Michael, saying stuff like, you're just dying to get rid of me. Put me in a fucking home. All you want, you're going to take my money. You're going to, all these like horrible inner thoughts that someone may silently kind of sit with, but it's just, again, being just blasted at you on Front Street. These kind of paranoid, accusatory remarks of someone living in like confusion and misery as their life is deteriorating before their eyes. And this 14-minute long track ends with just the sound of someone urinating in a toilet. Next, we have the title track, which is a 6-minute barrage of rumbling bass and static that completely overwhelms the mix. Sitting underneath that is Mike speaking in like a very proclamatory voice. And I can't understand what he's saying, to be honest with you. It's really low in the mix, as well as being washed out in reverb and delay, kind of similar to what it was like in Australian units. So yeah, there's not really much to say about that one, but it is kind of just like more in-your-face power electronics, kind of typical style music. And what follows this is the crushing first instance of what Mike will be placing between every other song moving forward for the rest of this album. And that is real audio recordings of his mother in her dying days. Most of them only last for about 10 or 15 seconds, but there is one that's like over a minute long. This first one being entitled Sarah 1. And it's just like 10 or 15 seconds of his mother kind of just like moaning, a mixture of moaning and wailing. It's like, it's high pitched. It's like really uncanny sounding and really unsettling. And just knowing that it's an actual recording of his mom is just like really off-putting. Again, this feeling of like, I'm an intruder here. I don't belong here. I shouldn't be hearing this. The next track, Chocolates, is also 14 minutes long. And it starts out with just typical power electronics noise. And then about 5 minutes in, we hear what sounds like a woman choking and like struggling to swallow. It's like really kind of panic inducing to listen to for me. It's really off-putting. And then what follows that is Mike Dando. It sounds like he's reading out loud a letter written by a man who has been diagnosed with a degenerative, incurable disease, like a goodbye letter, and has come to the conclusion that he's going to end his own life. The disease specifically is PSP, or progressive supranuclear palsy, which is a disease that progressively deteriorates the cells in the brainstem, cerebral cortex, cerebellum, and basal ganglia. So basically, he's going to lose all of his motor functions. He's going to lose the ability to like, everything is going to be hard for him. He's going to lose control of his body, basically. And this man is older, but he's not elderly. He talks very plainly about what the disease will do to him. He talks about how he watched his wife suffer and pass away from a similar situation. She also had like some sort of progressive illness, and mentioned specifically that she could barely like swallow. It was hard for her to even do that. And so I think that those sounds in the beginning of like that woman choking and like coughing and swallowing was supposed to be that man's wife. And he has decided that he doesn't want to share in that same fate. He is steadfast and resolute in his decision that he's going to end his own life. He explains that he's been to many different psychologists and has been proclaimed as sound of mind. He says he doesn't feel depressed. Instead, he feels resolute and he feels ready. He said he's spoken with his family and they're supportive of his decision. He wants to make this decision before he doesn't have the ability to make it for himself. And so the vocal portion of the song ends with him saying he now has to swallow a solution of barbiturates, which he has been told is very bitter, but he has some chocolates that will help him with the taste. Hence why the song is titled Chocolates. And this track is just like really somber. And I think it dives into a larger theme that Mike is exploring with this album, and that is basically how we treat our elderly and how we treat our infirmed and our sick. So this album opens up with a chorus of children singing proudly and loudly about how much they love their granddad. He is lovely. We care so much about him. And then everything after that is basically just like the stark reality and the truth that when people become infirmed and elderly, not all the time, but it does happen, you know, like we put them in assisted living centers and we kind of just like push them along to someone else. And it is admittedly a very negative outlook on the situation, but it is a real one. Just saying like, hey, this happens, look at it. And, you know, Mike, I believe, has every right to do that. I mean, this album is him basically showing you, hey, firsthand, this is my mom. Look at what happened to her. This is what happens. Look at it. I have to look at my mother changing and warping due to an illness that she did not choose for herself. And it's changing her into someone that he doesn't know. Anyways, after that track is a 5-second long track called Scream, and it's Nora screaming. And then for me, the most harrowing part of this album is the next little audio recording of Nora, and it's called Sleep. And it's Nora yelling at a team of nurses who are like waking her up in the night, probably for some like blood test or something like that, which is very common. And she's just yelling at them. She's like, please let me just sleep. Like you could just hear she's just miserable and she's so frustrated. And next we have the track called Just Fucking Die, which is as ugly as this album gets to me. So it's basically Mike just being fed up and frustrated with the situation, and he's basically just saying like, I wish you would just fucking die, you know, so you don't have to keep living in this misery anymore. And that is such a real, you know, sentiment. It's ugly and it's naked, but it is human and it is real. And it's something that I'm sure many people have thought to themselves, you know, in a moment of anger, in a moment of frustration. It is not one, thankfully, that I can relate to personally, but I can absolutely sympathize with it. Next, we have Sarah 2, which is a extended, longer version of that first moaning and wailing audio clip. Again, very unsettling, very uncanny sounding. And then the penultimate track is named Ending (Nora), which is a longer track that starts really abrasive and kind of typical power electronics and sound, but then begins to slowly fade away until it's just more of a ambient drone music piece with really cavernous echoing booms that sound very distant and far off. And it's just kind of like, you know, the end. And you're kind of getting an audio portrayal of what has happened with his mom. You know, she's passed on, and now the chaos and the confusion and the horrors have finally given way, and they've calmed down, and now it's just open space. Ultimately, the album ends with the song Grandma There's No One Quite Like, which is another children's choir singing a similar song, but now it's for grandma. And mixed on top of this is Nora's voice, and she's muttering something very faintly and very weakly, and you can't really understand what she's saying, but it's just like her, you know, kind of trying to talk, but can't really talk. And then finally, the album just fades into silence. And it ends. And then it's over. And now this is over. That's our final album. We're done. We have gone through all 15. Ending on a somber note, but again, like I said, it has been the most harrowing listen for me personally while doing research for this video series. And that's it, guys. We did it. We're done. We have finished Music as Horror, 15 haunting albums. I hope you have enjoyed this journey with me. I have enjoyed kind of researching this music, learning more about the different genres out there, learning more about what people are doing. I don't really have a lot to add. I feel like I've said everything that I want to say. Really, I just hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please leave me a like on this video. Give me a comment on maybe what was your favorite album of the whole series. Have you listened to any of these? Have I shown you any of these albums, and then have you gone on to listen to them? What was your experience like? I'd love to hear about that down in the comments below. Please subscribe. It helps out the channel a lot. I would love to build this and be able to do this as a thing moving forward for a long time. This has been a really fun journey for me, and I'm really happy that it's finally done with, so I can kind of move on from it and start other projects that I have in mind for this channel. So subscribe and stick around. Turn on that notification bell. You'll get notified when the next thing pops up. It won't be a year. I promise I won't make you wait that long. But yeah, thank you so much for following me through Music is Horror 15 Haunting Albums. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.